Hey everybody, check it out. The horse's eye is glowing just like in my novels. Hey, what can you do? Anyway, today's video is going to be more of the best writing advice you will ever hear. If you want to check out the previous video where I gave some writing advice, the link is underneath here. Subscribe to my channel, click on that link, watch both videos, and you're going to get insider secrets on how to get published, the best writing advice you're ever going to hear. Now, just so you know, I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press. This book is epic, it's big, it's huge. It's been compared to George R.R. Martin, Stephen Erikson, Tad Williams, all of the big epic fantasy writers I've been compared to at one time or another. And if you watch my other video, you'll see I talk about all the Comic-Cons I've been to where I have met and sat with these guys on panels. Most every famous fantasy science fiction writer, I have had lunch, dinner, sat at the bar with them, talked shop, talked about a lot of things. So I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about writing advice and getting published, because I know a lot of you that are watching this video want to be published someday, and I'm going to give you some of the best advice right now about how I did it and about how a lot of my friends in the business did it. A lot of people like Brandon Sanderson, Jim Butcher, Tad Williams, a lot of these guys that I've sat and talked to this about on the subject. So let's get right to it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the first novel I ever wrote was a horror novel. It was a big epic horror novel. It was the size of Stephen King's The Stand. I queried agents. I queried editors. Hundreds of them. Got hundreds of rejection letters. I learned from that experience. What I did, I knew my first novel had potential, but it just wasn't good enough. So I wrote another novel. This big epic fantasy was the second novel I ever wrote. I queried agents. I got every agent that I queried pretty much was interested in representing me, and as soon as I signed with an agent, he got me a book deal pretty quick. So let me tell you how I did that, exactly how I did that. First of all, I knew that I wanted to write big epic fantasy like George R.R. Martin, like The Wheel of Time, like Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, like Pat Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, like Stephen Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, like Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings. I wanted to write a big, huge, fat, epic book just like they wrote. And as you can see, my books are big. This is the German version. It's huge, it's thick. It's 300,000 words. To put that in perspective, Game of Thrones was about 300,000 words. So I took that in mind, and so what I did before I started this book is I gathered up some of my favorite novels, and I'll show you which ones I got. I got Shogun. I got Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. I got Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. Of course, I got Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I grabbed The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. And I grabbed Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. The reason I picked these 6 books is because they were big, epic, long adventure novels that had sold millions and millions of copies, and I wanted to read them 5 times each and study everything that those authors had done and plumb the secrets of those books so I could put every element that's in those books in my book, The Forgetting Moon. So how did I do that? Well, that's what I just told you. I read them each 5 times, and I studied the structure of those novels. For instance, let me give you some for instances here. Let's say in George R.R. Martin or Robert Jordan book, let's say there's a scene of exposition. If you don't know what a scene of exposition is, it's just kind of a flashback scene where a character's thinking about something that happened in his past. Well, what I would do, those are very difficult to write. Those are very difficult to interweave into your story and make them seem natural. So what I did was I studied how every one of those authors approached that. So if there was a scene of exposition in any one of those books, what I did was I mapped out how many paragraphs they used for that scene, how many sentences, how many words, and I kept a chart and a graph, and I mapped out where in the scene they used that. Now, what I did with that information was when I was writing my book, The Forgetting Moon, I had a scientific study of already how the great people did exposition, how they did flashback scenes. I knew that I was not going to exceed the word count of, say, Robert Jordan in one of those little scenes. I knew that I was not going to underdo the word count like some of the guys, like Larry McMurtry has a small word count. But I was always going to put myself somewhere in the middle of that, so nobody could say that my exposition seemed awkward or out of place or too wordy. Because no, I did a scientific study of the whole thing. I got it right. It's just in there. And you can do the same thing if you want to write big epic fantasy adventure novels, or big epic westerns like Lonesome Dove, or big historical epics like Shogun, or even big horror epics like The Stand. Another thing that I did was, let's say a character walked onto scene, and it's the first time you've met the character. Every one of those books, I did a word count of how many words those authors were using to describe that character. How many sentences, how many words, and I kept a little graph, and some of them, like Robert Jordan, used quite a few words. Some of them didn't use too many words. I felt that George Martin kind of struck a balance. In all these studies I did, George R.R. Martin with Game of Thrones kind of struck the most equal balance between all of the words that he would use to describe a character when he first introduced them on scene. And so what I did was I never exceeded the word count of Robert Jordan. I never used too few words, and I tried to keep the amount of words that I used at about the same amount that George R.R. Martin used for his characters. And you can do that too. You can take these books and you can do the same kind of study, and it's going to help you. First of all, it's going to help you in a couple ways. You're going to be reading 7 great novels 4 or 5 times. And you can't help but learn a lot of stuff when you do that. And especially if you take notes, and you take copious notes like I did. And we're going to get back to taking notes a little bit at the end of this video, so stay tuned. Now, for instance, let's say it's not a character that walks on scene. Let's say the character walks into a building. Let's say he walks into a castle, or he's riding up to a castle, or he walks into a saloon, or he's riding up to the saloon. How many words did each author use to describe that castle, or to describe that saloon, or to describe the inside of the cathedral where those characters just went? Again, I did a study of all of that, and I made sure that I did not exceed the word count of Robert Jordan, and I did not go too low like some of them, but I kept kind of in the George R.R. Martin middle range, because I thought he was doing it the best. Another guy that does it really well, which you saw, was Tad Williams. Tad Williams and George R.R. Martin were about similar with their word counts. And so, if you just want to study those 2 books, great, you can save yourself some time. But I suggest read them all and read them multiple times. So let's say that your character, let's say your scene has dialogue in it. I studied exactly at what point in the scene those, in the beginning of the chapter, the end of the chapter, middle of the chapter, sprinkled throughout the chapter, how much dialogue was used, when the author started using it, whether he just started right off the chapter with a line of dialogue, or whether they set up the scene for 2 or 3 pages. Now, Robert Jordan, he sets up the scene for 2 or 3 pages before anybody starts talking. I wouldn't recommend that. I think his books are fantastic, but I did not want to go down that path. I wanted to go down more of the Larry McMurtry path, where sometimes the chapters just start right off with dialogue, and then you get to some of the descriptions and exposition later. So I made a little chart of each author and what they were doing as far as dialogue, exposition, word count for the character descriptions, all of that. And so I wanted my book to never exceed the word count of any of these guys, because I knew my book was going to be long and epic, and I just didn't want it to be too long and epic, because it would never get published, and it would be too wordy, and I'd hear about that if it was too wordy. Also with action scenes. Let's say we've got an action scene in Lonesome Dove where Gus McCrae or Woodrow Call are fighting some of the Apaches. Or let's say that in George R.R. Martin we've got, Jamie Lannister fighting, whoever it was he fought when he got his hands cut off. Well, you know what I'm talking about. Any action scene, I didn't care what it was, I did a word count. I'll be honest, sometimes the action scenes were really quick. People got killed really quick. Sometimes the battle scenes could last forever. But I paid attention to what was going on, what kind of inner dialogue was going on in the characters' heads during the fights. Were the fights going quickly? Were the fights kind of bogging down because the characters were thinking during the fights? Where, every author did it a little bit differently, and I struck a balance between, like, again, I'm not to go back to Game of Thrones, but I think George R.R. Martin did it kind of the way that I was kind of aiming to do it with mine, which so I paid special extra attention to what he was doing, and I did not exceed the word counts. Again, some guys will write huge epic battle scenes that we're just go chapter for chapter for chapter, and the plot stops. Everything stops. The characters stop interacting with each other verbally because it's just fight, 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 fight. You've seen it in movies where, at the end of a Transformers movie where the last 45 minutes is just non-stop action just all the time, and you're kind of bored after about 5 minutes of it, right? Well, there's a lot of authors that do it wrong. I'm telling you, the authors that I picked, they did it right, and that's why they're bestsellers. That's why I studied what they were doing. Another thing that I did was, if you don't want to write epic fantasy, if you don't want to write big epic adventure novels, study the stuff you like. Let's say you want to write a little bit more sparsely, like Elmore Leonard. He uses no description for his characters. He uses no description for any building. It's all just snappy, witty, Quentin Tarantino-like dialogue from the start to the finish. And if you want to write books like this, I would get Elmore Leonard novels. I would get George Pellicano's novels. I would study the guys that are doing this kind of thing really well. One guy that does it really well is Robert B. Parker with the Spencer novels. Elmore Leonard is a master at it. Even though I love writing big, huge, wordy, long, epic novels, I'm not afraid to read an Elmore Leonard novel that has none of that stuff in it and still love the way and appreciate the way he writes. And I still study some of his dialogue and some of the witty banter, and I study the humor of guys like this, and I can interject it into my big epic fantasy, and I think that it adds to it. What I'm saying is be a diverse reader. Be a diverse reader. Let's say you don't want to write epic fantasy or Quentin Tarantino screenplays. Let's say you want to be a little bit more literary, like John Irving or something. Well, what you do is you get every John Irving book you can, and you read it, and you study it, and you take notes on everything that I just told you to take notes on. Study his sentence structure. Study how he fits sentences into the paragraph. John Irving is a master of doing a 20-word sentence followed by a one-word sentence, followed by a sentence that lasts a whole paragraph, followed by another one-word sentence, followed by a 15-word sentence, followed by all that stuff, you need to study it, you need to learn how to do it. And even if you learn how to do it in a literary fiction, and if you want to write epic fantasy or Quentin Tarantino type mysteries, still study people like John Irving and figure out what they're doing. Let's say you want to write other type of literary fiction like The Man in Moscow. Again, read the book, read books similar to it, study it, take notes, take copious notes about what you're reading and how those authors are going about structuring their stories. And let's say you want to write a mystery like an old Brit. Let's say you want to do a PBS Masterpiece Theater type of British mystery like Elizabeth George's Inspector Lindley mysteries. Take Elmore Leonard and his sparse writing and combine it with George R.R. Martin and his dense writing, and you will get Elizabeth George. Her mysteries are 1,000 pages, and they're great. She uses all of the same techniques that George R.R. Martin and all those adventure writers use, but she puts them in a mystery, and it's fantastic. They're bestsellers. Learn what she did. Learn how she did it. Maybe you like Dennis Lehane. Again, you can study him. He's got tons of books. He's probably one of the masters at mystery writing. If you want to be a mystery writer, study Dennis Lehane, study Elizabeth George, study Elmore Leonard. Figure out what it is they're doing and take notes. Maybe you want to write cop procedural novels like Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch novels. Get a bunch of cop procedurals like this and figure out what they're doing. Figure out what kind of laws and that the cops have to know, what kind of policy and procedures cops have to follow. Figure out what kind of things lawyers are doing and figure it all out. Do the research. And a lot of the research can be done by just reading all of Michael Connelly's books and taking notes and learning the craft of a police procedural and what policemen really do. Maybe you want to write thrillers like Brad Thor. Again, the same thing. Tom Clancy. Study the thrillers. Study everything that they've done. Study Nelson DeMille's thrillers like Plum Island. You'll learn so much if you just take notes. Reread them 4 or 5 times each. Take notes on the dialogue, on the scene descriptions. You will learn so much about the craft of writing. I was watching Howard Stern the other day, and he had the lead singer of Metallica, James Hetfield. And James Hetfield was saying, hey, when we got first started, We didn't have our own songs. We didn't know how to write our own songs. We were scared to write our own songs and play them. Or if we had written our own song, we were scared to play it in concert. So at a club or a bar. So what we did is we took really obscure songs from bands like Motorhead and Bob Seger and Black Sabbath, just songs that not a lot of people had heard, and they would just play them in the clubs as if they were their own songs. And that's kind of what I'm asking you to do. Read these books as if they're your own books and you're the one that wrote them, but take notes and learn what you're doing. Fake it until you make it, right? I don't even care if you get a George R.R. Martin book and just take a couple pages of his book and type it out word for word, because that's going to teach you how to write like he writes, if you want to write like him. If you want to write like Elmore Leonard, take a couple pages of his book and type it out. Get in the, there's a lot of authors that will tell you, yeah, I don't read in my genre. I don't want to be influenced by anything else in my genre. I want my stuff to be all original. Well, that's nonsense. They all read everything. You can't be a good author if you don't read everything, including stuff in your own genre. They read what's in their genre. You need to read what's in the genre you want to write in, and you need to, even if you want to type out pages and pages of what they've done to get the rhythm of how they're doing it, that's perfect. Artists do it all the time. Artists will copy other artists when they're first learning out. I mean, I can tell you, I was a professional illustrator for a while, and I made my chops just in high school and college, just slavishly recreating Michael Whelan paintings and Larry Elmore paintings and Tim and Greg Hildebrandt paintings. I would just copy what I was seeing, and I learned a lot about artwork and how to compose a picture just from that. And I'm telling you, if you do the same thing with the writing, if you type out some pages of someone, you're going to learn what they're doing pretty quick. And if you take notes on top of that, and then if you read and reread and reread and read everything, including stuff in your genre, stuff out of your genre, you're going to learn the craft of writing. Now, it might take you a lot of years. I mean, I have no college degree in writing. If I'm a good writer, and I think I am because I'm published by Simon & Schuster, arguably one of the best publishing houses in the world. If I'm a good writer, it's because I read 3,000 books and I paid attention to what I was doing while I read them. Now, let me tell you another thing. Before we end this, I'm going to end this video with my two most important bits of writing advice secrets, and I mentioned them in my last video. Take notes. If you are thinking about your novel and you think of a great bit of dialogue or a great scene or a great word or anything, I don't care what it is. You stop what you're doing and you write that down somewhere. I don't care if you tell it to yourself in your phone. I keep a piece of paper in my wallet. I stop what I'm doing. I get out of the shower. I get out of bed. I stop whatever conversations. I've even pulled my car over on the freeway and I write that idea down and I save it. Because don't get in the habit of thinking you'll remember that idea, because you will not. And then I have, and if you watched my last video, I talked about the structure of me compiling an outline and how I save those ideas into a folder. Like I said, click the link below and watch that video. You will like that video just as much as you like this one. And the last bit of advice that I've got for you is, when you're writing, you better be having fun while you're writing. Because I'm telling you, if you're not having fun while you're writing, your readers, they're not going to be having fun reading your stuff. So make sure you're having fun. Write. Take notes, take notes, take notes. Study other authors. And I promise you, your first book might not get published. Your second book, you might get lucky like me, and your second book would get published. Maybe it's going to be your 11th book like Brandon Sanderson. But if you keep working at it, that is the secret to getting published, to great writing. And I appreciate you watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.